There are three people here today that I want to introduce. If I have accomplished anything in life, much of the credit goes to the woman who makes my home. One of the key words in the Bible is the word chesed, which can't be translated into English. There isn't any one English word that catches it. It's the idea of passionate, undeserved loyalty. And that's what God demonstrates to His people. And I tell my students, I have no trouble in the world understanding that word, because I live with it every day. Passionate, undeserved loyalty. Well, there's a short circuit in my system. There's a direct connection between the waterworks and my heart, and I have trouble with that way. There are two other people here that I want to introduce. One is my brother-in-law, Calvin Johnson. To a significant degree, it's because of him that I'm in the ministry. My sister is older than I won't tell you how much older, and she brought home with her one weekend from Asbury College this young fella from Western Virginia, almost Eastern Kentucky, but just barely Western Virginia. And he preached in our little rural Methodist church. And I tell you what, the next night I was taking the cows out, and I was saying to myself, you know, if I could preach like that, I believe I'd be a preacher. And in the next several weeks, I preached several cows into the kingdom. So, Calvin, thank you. Calvin Johnson. Sainthood comes in many, many different forms. Most of it unseen. It'll embarrass my sister Marvel to death. She's right at the top of my list of saints. She has cared for my mother and father in an incredibly selfless way. Quietly, behind the scenes. Incredible patience. My mother's a wonderful woman, but she's a tough person to take care of. And Marvel does it with grace and love and kindness. Thank you, Marvel. Well, I hope I can shut the waterworks off now. Let's see. What I want to do today is mostly teaching. You've had good preaching already, and you'll have some more. I said to Paul, do you really want me to take the whole time? He said, yep, it's yours. So, you get it. We have this interesting, odd cliche that is the theme of our conference. The whole Bible for the whole world. What in the world does that mean? The whole Bible for the whole world. I think the last phrase is a little more understandable. Yes, it's not just for us white North Americans. The Bible is for the whole world. It is not a cultural artifact. It is a book which has an incredible capacity to speak to anybody, anywhere. It's marvelous. It's for the whole world. And part of the energizing that I want to take place in my life and that we want to take place in our lives is that passion for the world. But the whole Bible? What? Why don't we just say the Bible for the whole world? I know it rings a little better if you say the whole Bible for the whole world. But what do we mean when we say the whole Bible? And I think the answer is that we're Wesleyans. And Wesley, as in the case of sanctification, so in the case of the Bible, got hold of something that the early church knew, but the medieval church forgot. And that is, the Old Testament is of as much value to the Christian believer as the New Testament. The New Testament is not the Christian Bible. It's interesting, in my racket, biblical academics, people have gotten very, very frightened now of talking about the Old Testament. That's not politically correct any longer. And so it's called the Hebrew Bible. You don't say Old Testament in a academic setting, or you're in trouble. It's the Hebrew Bible. Well, what do you call that other thing then? Those other 29 books, or 27 books, yes. What do you call those other 27 books? Well, it's sort of who cares. But really, it's the Christian Bible. But that's not true. It is the Bible. And the early church, in recognizing that the 39 books of the Jewish community were their Bible, and as inspired as the 27 books that had come in their own experience, that was a moment of profound significance. Wesley recaptured that in a remarkable way in his understanding that it's the whole Bible that preaches the Christian message. And that in fact, if you try to preach the Christian message from the last 27 books, you are likely to preach a distortion. That's a strong statement, friends. I won't ask any of you here to hold up on one hand how many Old Testament sermons you've preached in the last 6 months. The whole Bible for the whole world. The greatest tragedy of this double error, that the New Testament is enough and that we don't need the Old Testament, the greatest tragedy of this double error is in our doctrine of salvation. When you look at modern evangelicalism in America, it's possible to believe that the reason Jesus Christ came was to forgive our sins and get us ready for heaven. That is the modern evangelical doctrine of salvation. It is wrong. And when you look at the tragedies in our evangelical church in America, you can see the fruit of that faulty doctrine of salvation. Jesus came to forgive my sins and enable me to escape hell. So it doesn't matter how I live. Now, if you add to that the unfortunate doctrine of eternal security, you've got the whole mix. I went to an altar once. I was really serious. I was really sincere. So, I'm saved. So, it doesn't matter how I live. I'm going to sin every day in thought, word, and deed. So don't be surprised when I do. That doesn't have anything to do with salvation. Now, I'm putting that in very bald terms. Who else could do that but me? But I'm confident that if you look at the tragedies in American evangelicalism in the last 30 years, that's where the root is. Christ doesn't expect any more of me. You shouldn't expect any more of me. And if I commit tragic sins against my family, my church, well, what else do you expect? I'm just human. And although righteousness is desirable, I mean, you can't read the New Testament and not believe that, it's not attainable. It's a carrot on a stick in front of the donkey, and the donkey spends his life reaching for that carrot and never getting it. To me, that is not good news. That's not good news. You mean Jesus saved me to spend the rest of my life in frustration till finally I can die? Surely not. Well, in fact, the New Testament doesn't teach this. But if you don't know the Old Testament, it's easy to miss it. When Paul calls us to die to sin, it's easy to miss it. Well, he obviously doesn't mean that. Tom Halford gave me a wonderful cartoon. The group were sitting in, obviously, a Bible study, and the one lady says, I can't honestly say I've ever died to sin, but I did faint once. He didn't mean that. He doesn't. It's metaphoric talk. You can't do that. Well, in fact, Paul was dead serious. And we can understand it when we see the biblical doctrine of salvation. The New Testament writers assumed we understand the Old Testament, and therefore they don't have to repeat a lot of stuff. They assume that they can build on that foundation. They assume that they can go on from these points. Paul says we ought not to have to go back to give you milk, but okay, here we go. Apparently you're in the milksop stage. So, I want to talk to you today about what I believe is the biblical doctrine of salvation that ultimately undergirds Wesley's understanding of holiness. It is because Wesley was a whole Bible person. He was able to say the kinds of things he was able to say. And so, when we write on the foundation stone of the Morrison building, which was the Asbury Seminary building for the first 16 years of its life, when we write on that foundation stone the whole Bible for the whole world, we are saying that any genuine doctrine of salvation for the whole world must come from the whole Bible. Okay, let's begin at the beginning then. From the Old Testament perspective, what is the problem? What is the problem that we're working with? The problem is, according to Genesis 3, alienation. Separation. Alienation from God. That tragedy. The cool of the evening had been the happiest time of the day. God's coming. I'll race you, Eve. Hi, Father. Guess what? We planted the back 4,000 this afternoon. And now what? Get out of there, Eve. That's my bush. God's coming. God's coming. The power of that third chapter of Genesis never ceases to amaze me. In a simple little story, God's coming, and it's the most terrible thought in the universe. So like a 3-year-old with his head under a pillow, I'm hiding, God. You can't see me. But not only alienation from God, alienation. Adam and Eve are no longer one. Now they are rivals. Don't look at me, God. It's that woman you gave me. And I think that's why they knew for the first time they were naked. Adam had never, ever seen himself before. All he saw was this beautiful, beautiful gift of God. But now, when he looks at her, all he sees is himself. I wonder if I look tough. I wonder if I look manly. I wonder if, great Scott, I don't have any clothes on. And so it is with Eve. I wonder if I'm desirable. I wonder if he wants me. I wonder if he thinks I'm sexy. I wonder if... Alienation. What had been made one is ripped apart. And for the rest of their lives, they and their children walk through life with a mirror fixed in their hands. How am I looking? What are they thinking? Image. Damnable thing. And from the world, the ground that you were made to rule will frustrate you at every step of the way. Sweat, thorns, struggle. That's the problem. Alienation. Now I want to walk real carefully about relational theology. We don't have enough time to talk about all of that today. But nevertheless, I want to say that the problem, as far as the Old Testament sees it, is in the broken relationships that sin has brought into the world. And it is therefore not in the least surprising that we find what we find in chapter 4. Murder is the natural result. You're not my brother. You're my enemy. You're my rival. You're my competitor. I fear you. You could get ahead of me in the sight of God. Well, you're not going to do it. So, what's the need? Hear me. Hear me. Is the need forgiveness? Yes. Is the need for reconciliation? Yes. But above all, the need is for restoration. I can be forgiven in my closet. And it doesn't affect how I behave tomorrow, necessarily. I can be reconciled today But what about tomorrow? Can I be restored? Can I be restored in my relation to God? Can I be restored in my relation to others? Can I at least begin to be restored in my relation to the world? Again, I'm speaking simplistically here, but do you hear me? Forgiveness is not the first issue. It may be the first in order, but it's not the first in importance. If there is genuine restoration, there is forgiveness. If there is genuine restoration, there is reconciliation. But both of those fall short of the ultimate goal that begins the moment that pair go through the flashing swords. God, the devil says, God, I won. You made them to love, but you're just. Eat your heart out. I gotcha. For all the rest of eternity, you will long for them, but your justice won't let you have them. They can never be restored into your arms because your justice will prevent it. They can never be restored to themselves. They can never be restored to one another. I gotcha. And God said, I wouldn't be too sure of that. I wouldn't be too sure of that. The game is not over, my friend. So how are you going to do that? How are you going to restore this marred image that's in God's mind? This picture of us. Go to Genesis 6:5. To me, one of the most profound statements in the Bible because of its chilling implications. It is the ultimate description of what has happened to us. And it's very difficult to convey the real sense of the Hebrew. This is the NLT. Now the Lord observed the extent of the people's wickedness, and he saw that all their thoughts were consistently and totally evil. Well, that's not bad, even though I didn't do this one. What the Hebrew says is the very way they shape the images of their hearts is corrupt, deadly, altogether, always. That's fairly extensive, isn't it? And this is the one that fascinates me. Some people, in trying to think about differences between us and animals, have suggested that maybe this is the difference, that we can shape an image of ourselves and then step back and look at it and think about it. That it is this capacity to image, this capacity to put things outside of ourselves, to make pictures. Well, if it is, I don't know that it is. But the very way we shape our thoughts, the very way we envision reality, is deadly. It leads to corruption. It leads to death all the time. Wow. And I think about America, so utterly controlled by images, pictures. I think about, I've never read a Stephen King novel. I'm too much of an image person. Things get in my head and they stick. The wrong things. But I know enough about those novels. I know enough about the horror films to think, oh dear God, what pictures are we jamming our heads full of? Why is it that the pornography industry has become the dominant industry in terms of growth on the internet? The very way we go about shaping the pictures of our hearts. Now, I hope you brought your lunch. I love Hebrew. One of the reasons is this kind of thing. Greek divides your thinking from your acting. Your mind and your heart and your will. The Old Testament jams them all together. You can't separate the way you think from what you want and what you do. Now, that's an important issue in your translating the Bible to your people. When the Old Testament talks about heart, it's using a different code than we use in English. Because heart in English is all feeling. Heart in English is all the emotion. That's not true. Your heart is where you think and decide and do. There it is. Now then, what in the world is the solution to that? We are alienated from God, we're alienated from others, we're alienated from the world, we're alienated from ourselves. And the very way we go about shaping the images that motivate us is corrupted. What are you going to do? Well, I'm so glad that Bill started where he started yesterday evening with the music. You start with the gracious initiative of God. Don't ever let anybody tell you that in the Old Testament people are saved by keeping the law. Now, you know, the dispensational movement did a lot of good things for us. And we need to be careful that we don't shoot our friends. The dispensationalists are a lot more our friends than some other people that I could name but won't. But one of the unfortunate things that dispensationalism did with the Scofield Bible and all of that was to suggest that in the Old Testament people are saved by keeping the law. It's only in the New Testament that you're saved by grace. That is not true. God says, Abraham, here's my law. Keep that perfectly, and I might give you something. Not for one moment. Not for one moment. God shows up and says, Abraham, here's a baby, here's a land, here's a name. It's all yours. Go get it. That's called grace, friends. Well, you see, yeah, that's right. That's what Paul says, that you start out with grace, and then unfortunately you shift over into obedience. Nope. Same thing. Here are the Hebrew people making bricks. Here's this old man out in the desert. God says, old man, take these two rocks with words written on them, take them down there to Egypt, and give them to those people, and say, now you follow these rocks perfectly for 400 years, and I'll deliver you.